And there. Okay. All right. Welcome here to the Business Podcast Mastermind, a special little group here of pioneers in the podcasting and business space. And we meet here each week to find out new ways to grow our audience, grow our revenue, and so forth. This started as just a little group meeting once a week and grew to incorporate larger audience and participants. I'll give a little bit intro to our typical hosts here. Henry and I are here right now, but we often have Rob Greenlee, VP of Content and Partnerships at Libsyn, former chair of the Podcast Academy, co-host of the New Media Show, and longtime evangelist of the podcasting industry. He's been out a little bit on leave. Happy to see him last week. Hopefully, he'll come in again soon. Henry Lopez, you see right here, a serial entrepreneur, small business coach, and host of the top-rated How with Business podcast, dedicated to helping others start, run, and grow their small business. And I'm Ethan Janney. Currently, my main drag is the Edge of NFT podcast, which covers the top 1% in in NFTs and what will stand the test of time. I'm actually traveling here in New York City, going to several NFT events that are going on here. So exciting stuff going on in NFTs. So without further ado, I will introduce our awesome guest here, Joe Apfelbaum. Both Henry and I have had him on our individual podcasts. Henry was actually, I don't know if I mentioned this to you previously, Joe, but Henry is the one that introduced me to who you are. He didn't make a direct introduction, but he said, hey, you got to check out this guy, Joe Apfelbaum. He knows what he's doing, and he's a cool guest to have on your podcast. So that's why we reached out. And a little bit about you for folks who might not know. Joe is the CEO of Ajax Union, a digital marketing agency that builds highly strategic ROI producing marketing funnels for B2B companies. Ajax Union works with companies that are 5 to 500 million in annual sales that can use marketing strategy, well-crafted brand assets, and email automations that drive traffic via SEO, SEM, and social media, and that value an optimized marketing funnel. And not only is Joe a great entrepreneur, but he's a lot of fun to chat with. And so I guess we'll dive right in. I'll get started with some questions, and we'll get to know what you can share today. So
Awesome.
first of all, tell us like in general what you have done in the podcasting space. I know that you've been on a lot of podcasts, and I know that you value what podcasts can offer. What's your general experience and thoughts about the power of podcasting?
Podcasts used to be popular, and then they weren't popular that much, and then they became popular again only recently. My first experience on a podcast was before I was even comfortable doing public speaking. I recently posted about this on LinkedIn. Andrew Warner from Mixergy reached out to me, and he messaged, and he said one of his people messaged or something, and they said, we heard you have one of the fastest growing companies in America, and we'd love to have you be featured on our podcast to tell us about how you grew your company. And I was like, what? Why would somebody want to hear from me? That was like the first thing. And so that was like my first foray into that. And I started kind of realizing that I have a really big fear of public speaking and a really big fear of just in general sharing my thoughts. Like a lot of people having imposter syndrome, things like that, not having a very open communication chakra, and just being overall just like scared of what people are going to say, have me being recorded on the internet forever, making a statement, let alone speaking for hours and hours and hours on a podcast. What I looking
Nice.
back now, I realize how ridiculous it was. But over the past years, I've launched several podcasts. I've launched podcasts called CEO Mojo that I did, and I interviewed 52 CEOs about self-limiting beliefs that CEOs have and how to kind of get motivated. I have a podcast called The Breakthrough Maze where I coach people, and we put anonymous coaching sessions. I coach entrepreneurs how to create breakthroughs in their life. So we talk about issues that they wouldn't normally talk about associated with their name, but we just put it out there. I have lots of different conversations, and they often get recorded. And with the permission of the person, I say, can I anonymously share our conversation with the world? And often they'll say yes. Sometimes I'll interview coaches about thoughts on breakthroughs, like specialists. Like I interviewed Danny Dreyer from Chi Running about his book that teaches you how to put together Tai Chi and running. And he's been doing it for 40 years, like perfecting how to like be mindful when you're running and not get injured. So I love obviously hosting my own podcast, but I what I appreciate the most is getting on other people's podcasts more than me being on my own, because I get exposure to a whole new audience and I have a conversation. A podcast doesn't have to be an interview necessarily. It can just be a conversation that you have, either a conversation with somebody else or a conversation that you have with yourself. So podcasts are really popular nowadays because people are just used to being sucked into social media, and then all their attention is taken, and you can listen to a podcast which is really could be really high quality curated information while you're multitasking and doing something else like driving, or while you're working, or while you're taking a shower. And people are getting much more used to doing that, realizing that you're able to consume information quickly on a podcast. Like I had a trip not too long ago with my family from Florida to New York. We drove. And during that drive, I was the one driving and the kids were watching videos and like doing their own stuff. So I put on a pair of noise canceling headphones and I listened to a podcast about how to trade in the market. This was a couple of years ago. And I learned everything about stocks and trading and all this types of stuff. And I had many, many, many hours to listen, and it was perfect. I listened to a podcast about PPC and the intricacies of pay-per-click advertising. So there are a lot of really good educational podcasts that are almost like courses, and there's a lot of really great information that you can get out of it. But what I love about podcasts for like entrepreneurs, coaches, and consultants is if you're a thought leader or you'd like to be a thought leader, a podcast is a really great way for you to be able to get a lot of information out of you. And then using tools like Otter.ai that transcribe everything using artificial intelligence, you're able to repurpose that content. I get placed on podcasts all the time, and then I have my video editor go cut up little 30-second to 1 minute snippets of those podcasts, create audiograms, which are like it's almost like a video that has like a wave thing moving with the words that you're saying, and you can publish them
Hmm.
as Instagram stories, on LinkedIn as LinkedIn posts with video. You could post them on YouTube. There are so many different places where you can post those audiograms. If you happen to have the video, you can post it as a video with graphics and subtitles. But you can do so much with repurposing podcasts and creating content very quickly. And for me, like I was very difficult for me in the beginning to do a podcast on myself, like just by myself talking to a wall. Like, who are you talking to? You're just doing a podcast talking. But if you do preparation in advance and you think about what episodes you want, what the episodes are going to be about, you put bullet points on what you're going to be talking about, you even write it down or do a test episode just to see how it comes out. The more you do it, the more comfortable you'll get at doing it. So if you're new to podcasting, get interviewed first. That's really the key. Getting interviewed by other people. This way you're just answering questions and having a conversation, and that will help you get more comfortable with being on a podcast. I don't know if that was helpful.
Yeah, lots of good stuff. I mean, one thing that's really, reinforcing here is for, the sort of value that can be generated and created out of nothing from podcasting. I think that's one of the most exciting things about it. It's like you said, you like going on podcasts, right? Some people like making the podcast, right? But in both cases, people are getting value out of it. People are getting value by being on podcasts. People are getting value by hosting a podcast. And one theme that's coming up for me lately as I look at the space and how it's growing and all the different ways in which people are leveraging podcasting. I mean, it's insane the sort of variety of ways that people monetize podcasts. I mean, we've heard of everything from a podcast that has no listeners and still probably generates, hundreds of thousands of revenue for well, not no listeners, but a small handful of listeners and probably generates hundreds of thousands of revenue, to ones that are huge and are about selling advertising, so it's fascinating. There's lots of ways to generate value, and I think, like you said, the the ways to clip and compound and reuse and iterate on what you're doing are kind of immeasurable. There's lots and lots of ways to do it. So that's really cool. That's good. Those are good insights. Um, I think it's really interesting that you first talked about, hey, like, I don't know, if I want to speak in public. I don't know if I want to put my words on record to go on the internet, all this stuff, which is interesting because I think we're gonna, you referenced it, but we can talk about it a little bit more. So now I've put my words on permanent record, and the next step is I'm gonna go blast it out to everybody, which is like another stage of self-confidence and, like what exactly are you doing here? Because you can make the content, you can put it out there, then you actually have to or almost obligated to or can get so much out of cutting it up into little snippets and putting on LinkedIn and Instagram, Facebook, and da da da, and this and that. So I'm curious, just because you're sort of in this mode now of like distributing content. Were there multiple steps for you in, okay, one, just being able to be on a podcast, and then taking the next step to say, hey, I actually want to like push this content out there so more people see it, and then going into kind of, I'm assuming that you kind of came to that in conclusion that it should be pushed out as much as possible. It's like ways you see people doing that.
So for me personally, I always tell people, I don't want to go viral. I don't want to be famous, and I don't want as many people as possible to listen to my stuff. I want the right people to listen to my stuff. That's my personal preference. Many people want to be famous and they want everyone to know them, and they want as many people as possible to get the message. But for me, that I get caught in a trap in that world. If I get stuck in the world of I'm trying to get as much as possible, then I'm not really getting much. For me, I'd rather be really strategic. And what I'm doing is I'd rather have the right 10 people listen, the right 100 people listen. I'd rather be intentional and know who listened to it and to be able to strategically follow up if I have a goal. So, for example, I have a podcast called High Energy Marketing, which follows my book, High Energy Marketing Book. And in this podcast, I talk about how to create marketing funnels and the whole idea of B2B marketing and why being strategic is so important. And so I'll send an episode out to a CEO that I know asked me a question regarding that idea. And I will then follow up with that CEO and have a conversation with them about that topic. And that can often turn into a new customer or a new referral. So for me, it's not so much about the quantity of people, it's what I do with it after. I got interviewed by Fox Business Network in 2011 or something. They hired a PR person and they got us onto Fox Business Network and a bunch of other channels. And I was really scared of going on international TV, being on a global channel, like being everywhere, having exposure to 35 million people. I was really scared of that. But I did it anyway. And it really helped me be able to get out of my comfort zone. One of the things that I thought would happen by getting on TV was I thought the whole world would call me and our phones would start ringing. And I told my staff, get ready to pick up the phone. Everyone's going to call. And crickets, nobody called. There was one person who did call. It was a rabbi. He wanted a donation. He's like, I see you're doing really well. I heard you're on the news.
I love this.
And can you contribute to my organization? And I said, what are you doing watching the news? It was really funny. It was really funny. Um, and so what I realized is the fortune is not in getting PR or being on a podcast or having a podcast. The fortune is in the follow-up. The fortune is sending it
hmm
strategically to the right people. So I used that
hmm
clip all over social media. I made sure the right people saw it. Before seminars, I put it out there. Whenever I did a seminar, I first played a 30-second clip of the news of the PR, and people watched it and they're like, oh wow, this guy is, I want to pay attention to this. It's like the ethos, logos, and pathos. You gotta establish authority. And being on a podcast helps in many different ways. It helps with search engine optimization because when you get featured on other people's podcasts, often they'll link back to your website. So you capture links that way. It helps with reputation management. If you Google my name, you'll see that I've been featured on over 200 podcasts. And so that fills up my brand name and my company's brand name with many, many different links, not just the podcast you were on, but all the other places it was syndicated to as well. So there's a big opportunity to be able to show up in many different places that you wouldn't normally show up and in many different ways. But again, for me, it's more about being strategic. Whenever I get interviewed at a podcast, I like to know who I'm talking to. So I'll do some research to figure out who's leaving reviews, what type of podcast it is, who the audience is, to be able to tailor my message to those specific people. So for me, I want to be strategic. Here's a saying I always say often: the right marketing strategy will save you a decade. Some people waste so much time just trying to get more traffic and more eyeballs. But if it's the wrong eyeballs, it doesn't matter if you have millions of eyeballs of the wrong eyeballs. You need hundreds of the right eyeballs, and you need to be able to have a message that resonates with them, and that'll convert into real revenue. But again, everybody has a different goal. Some people just want to be famous, and that's okay. I don't judge people for wanting to be famous. It's just, for me, it's not the right approach.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's really smart. You know, I referenced this previously as I've kind of passed over it before. You know, there's a podcast that is it's really just an excuse for somebody with a healthcare company to meet the vendors that and build relationships with them that would hire their healthcare company, right? And it, like I said, doesn't have to have a huge audience, you know, a nice little audience, you know, put some social media out there afterwards and so on and so forth. But a really great opportunity is to have an intentional conversation with a potential client, build that relationship, and then, you know, build some sort of revenue streams out of that, and it works out just fine. So I like I like the direction you're going in here, and we've definitely seen that a lot in this group. When you talk about following up, like with CEOs, you say, and I'm assuming this is, you know, to see if they might be a good client for Ajax Union, right? You know, how do you do that, or how do you recommend people kind of respectfully yet, you know, intentionally kind of follow up and build these relationships with folks that could actually lead to, you know, actual business?
If you want to follow up with somebody, don't waste their time. That's the last thing you want to do. So many times people say, I'd like to speak to you. I'd like to pick your brain. And they don't tell you what it's about, the context, or anything. And often I won't be inclined to reply to that, especially if I don't know who the person is, if I don't have a relationship with them. Even if I know who the person is, if they don't give me context, it makes it very difficult for me to prioritize replying to them. I don't know if you know this, but on average, people spend about 2 seconds looking at an email before they decide how they should respond or not. And so if you're emailing or DMing somebody, there's so much distraction going on at the same time. So you got to make it really easy for the person to be able to get value from that, enough for them to want to reply or respond in some which way or form. When you send somebody an email and says, I'd like to pick your brain, they're probably going to archive or delete it and move on to the next email, and they won't even know they did it. It'll happen subconsciously because the question everybody asks is like, what's in it for me? What's the value here? Do I need to be doing this right now? Or is there something else that's more important? And if there's something else that's more important, like watching Netflix, spending time with your kids, watching a video, a YouTube video that's entertaining, anything that's more important than replying to your email because you want coffee, unless the person thinks they're going to be able to sell you something or you're going to be able to provide them with some value because they know you, like you, and trust you, there's no way they're going to reply to that. I send messages to people that are my family and they don't even reply. It just happens. Not everyone's going to reply to you. And it's not because they don't like you, it's because they just get busy and they don't follow up. That's why the fortune's in the follow up. And when I say follow up, I don't mean annoyingly follow up, say, I'm just following up here. I'm just following up here. They know you're following up, even if you're not just following up. So what you want to do is you want to follow up with value. Adrian Miller talks about the 3 I's: invitations, introductions, information. You reply, you follow up. So if I wanted to follow up with you, Ethan, I would invite you to my next networking event. But really what I'm doing subconsciously is I'm just following up on our proposal or following up on whatever it is that I'm trying to talk to you about. But I'll make an excuse and give you an invitation, or I'll say, hey, I'd like to make an introduction to a CEO in the real estate industry, and I know that you work in real estate. So I'll say, hey, I have a CEO in the real estate industry. Here's his information. Would you like an intro? Would that be helpful to your business? Now, it's likely that you won't even reply to that. It's fine. It's okay. Because especially if you don't need the intro, you're going to be like, whatever, I don't even know what he wants. I don't know why he's messaging me. But if it does add value to you, you're going to appreciate that very much. And even if you're not ready for the intro, you're going to like that I was thinking about you. Same thing with information. If I have data or information that you need, I'll be like, hey, I came across an article in your industry. I think it would be helpful for you. Can I send it your way? So I'm asking you for permission. And now, because this concept of permission and consent is very, very powerful, once you give me permission to do it, now I'm doing you a favor by doing it. And the law of reciprocity states that when I do you a favor, you want to do me a favor back, or the universe will want to do me a favor back. And so the idea is be a giver, add value to other people, and that's how you follow up in a meaningful way without being annoying. And in order for you to be able to determine if there's an opportunity, you have to learn how to qualify leads, how to qualify people, identify if there's a need, identify if there's a decision maker, identify if they have a meaningful budget, if it makes sense, if you can add enough value. And of course, finally, making sure that the timing is right, because timing is everything. On average, salespeople follow up 1 to 2 times and they give up. Some salespeople follow up 3 times, but 80% don't follow up properly. They don't follow up properly. But 80% of sales are made between 5 and 12 follow-ups. So if you're not going to have 5 or 12 follow-ups, 80% of the time, you're not even going to even get close to closing the deal. I follow up and then follow up and then follow up. Sometimes I'll follow up 50 times. And then eventually I will get some type of response. But every time I'm following up, I'm adding value. And so the person's getting value every single time. They see how much value I'm stacking for them. And sometimes they'll respond, sometimes they won't respond. People are busy. They live very, very busy lives. And there's so much communication coming at them at once. It's very difficult for people to give you their attention. But once they do and they're locked in, that's when you can go and qualify. And if all the 4 different indicators make sense, then you can close the deal.
Yeah, I think that's really I think it takes practice and experience, right? To have that sensitivity to know, hey, I'm actually adding value here. I'm gonna keep in communication, right? I think it's so easy. It's really interesting statistic that you said, what was it between 80% of sales are made between what 5 and 12 follow-ups, and so it's interesting to think, hey, I might have added value in those 5 to 12 follow-ups. I said, hey, I want to invite you to this event. Oh, hey, I want to introduce you to this person. Oh, hey, here's a cool article that you might want to check out. Oh, hey, like here's an investment opportunity. Like, oh, hey, check this out for your here's a cool thing for your family to do this weekend. Like all of these things, I think it's easy to think because somebody didn't respond, because they didn't say thank you, like da 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 da, I didn't add value there, right? And I'm sure, like you said, that some of those things, they're not going to pan out, right? They might not be a direct hit on that person, but the fact that you have that statistic of 5 to 12 follow-ups, right? That's a big deal, right? So I think it takes that instinct too to like know when to stop, right? Or when it's okay to continue, and you're not wasting your time, you're not wasting their time. Um, or I might be wrong on that. Like, what do you think? Do you think it's about developing an instinct on how to, respectfully deal with people's time and energy? Is it just about staying committed? You're always going to follow up. You're not even going to try to imagine what they're thinking. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it takes a certain level of awareness to know if you're making negative assumptions about people's intentions. I think it's okay to have negative assumptions. I think it's more important than not to have the negative assumptions, that to be aware of the negative assumptions and not believe them. So we're going to have negative assumptions because that's who we are. It's 3 times harder to be positive than it is to be negative. So by default, we're going to be negative and think that people are judging us and think that we screwed up and having all those ideas in our head. But just recognize them and then take action anyway. The key is taking action. The key is being in action. If you want results in your life or in your business, you have to be committed to taking action, even if it doesn't make sense, even if you have reasons and excuses. You either have $1 million or you have a million reasons that you don't have $1 million. So the question is, which one are you going to subscribe to, reasons or results? Personally, I would rather have results and be unreasonable. Being unreasonable means that you have all the reasons in the world not to take action, but you still take action. You have all the indicators that say the person's not responding, let them go, don't follow up. But then you follow up one more time. Most people quit when they're 3 feet from gold. And you need to be told this, that the gold is right on the other side, and you got to just keep hacking away. The key is to do it in a way that gets you excited. If you're in your high vibration, like I am right now, if you're like pumped for life, if you're in joy, if you're in gratitude, if you're in blessings, if you're in freedom, then you do what you love. Then you're doing what you love. And when you do what you love, you attract more success. But if you're in pain and anger and suffering, if you're feeling weirded out, if you're not really into it because of the thoughts you're having, then you're having fear drive you instead of love. When you're being driven by fear, you're in scarcity. And when you're in scarcity, you're not going to have abundance. People are going to ignore you more. But if you're in awareness, if you're in happiness, if you're in freedom, if you're in joy, if you're in vitality, if you're in love, then the entire world is your oyster.
Beautiful. I like that, and I appreciate that, bringing that into the conversation. I'd like to make sure Henry has a chance to engage and ask any questions he has. I can come back with more. Of course, I've always got a ton of things to converse about. But yeah, Henry, did you have any thoughts,
Sure,
things you
yeah.
wanted to add or ask?
Obviously, inspirational as always, Joe. I fondly remember when you were on my show, which was a few years ago now, so earlier in my podcasting career, and you are still the only guest where I saw a measurable spike in listenership after you were on my show. So I'd never forget that alone. But just the energy that you communicate and exude is part of what makes it so great, just like you're doing here now. On this last topic of the follow-up, and it is such a key thing from sales. One of the businesses that I own, I'm a minority partner in, is a franchise where we do shared office space. We're competing against WeWork and others. And the one employee that we have, we call him a business center manager. She has to sell the offices, and that follow-up topic comes up a lot because she's classic of a lot of us, where immediately that we take that third follow-up radio silence as rejection, and we take it personally, right? And I can even feel it in her tone of voice of that dejection, right? And we all struggle with that. And so part of the question that Ethan was asking, one of the things we've done is just systematize that she has to follow up 7 times. That's our policy. But the points you're making about following up with value, I think we can continue to get better and better at. Now, doing this follow up with value.
You got to make it 12 times now.
Yeah, exactly. I may have to make it 12 times.
Maybe 50.
But my question to you, Joe, is it takes time. How do you manage or block out the time to do this intentional follow up?
Well, there is no way to manage time. You can only manage your priorities. And if you don't have the time, you can hire somebody else that has the time to do it, or you can use technology to help you do it. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, what are my priorities? What do I want to accomplish? If you want to close X amount of deals per year, and you have a reason why you want to close those deals, if you have a 70% occupancy rate and you need to add the other 30% in order to be profitable in your shared office space, and the person that's doing the follow-ups has a goal of generating $70,000 a year or whatever it is, and they're currently at 50, and in order for them to get to where they want to go, they need another 20 so that they can buy the boat they want to buy or whatever it is that they want to do with their life. Getting really clear on your why will help you prioritize those activities, because often we're just thinking about the money, but we're not thinking about what's behind the money. And if we could think about what's behind the money, it'll be the fuel that we need, not to do it for the money, but to do it for a bigger and better reason. Some of it has to do with checklists. Some of it has to do with systems and processes and SOPs and creating templates to make it easy. A lot of it has to do with understanding the mindset that marketing is about testing. When you are following up, you are marketing, and marketing is about testing. And so if the emails that you're using don't work, then maybe you should change the emails that you're using. Maybe you should change to text. Maybe you should change to WhatsApp. Maybe you should change to LinkedIn direct messaging. Maybe you should try to pick up the phone and leave a voicemail and tell them in the voicemail that the reason why you're calling is not for them to call you back, but for them to reply to the email that they sent you with a special voucher. and a special whatever, a chance to win or a survey or something interesting. I want to be able to know who I'm talking to. So for example, if I'm talking to accountants, they care about one thing. If I'm talking to web designers, they care about another thing. So depending on whoever you're talking to, your target market for that specific shared office space, making sure that you are talking to them in the language that speaks to them. I'll give you an example. Let's say, for example, you want to target architects to be able to fill your space with architects. And you do an event for architects, designers and architects every month. And so you followed up 3 times. They said they wanted the office space, and then they went radio silent. And you followed up a 3rd time, a 4th time, and you're like, hey, I just want to know, the space is almost not available anymore. If you still want it, let us know. You used all the tactics and it didn't work. And then you send them a separate email, special invitation to select architects. And you write in the email, say, hey, Joe, I just wanted to let you know that we're having an event and we only have 4 spots left for our architect event that we have every month for architects and designers to get together. If you're interested in a VIP ticket to the event, I'm happy to give you 1 complimentary. Let me know if you or one of your associates are available to join us. It's a great networking opportunity. And the person is much more likely to respond to that than a follow-up saying, hey, you didn't answer my last email, or whatever it is. Or you send them some type of other offer or opportunity with a different subject line. The key is to be creative in how you communicate and not just constantly just reply to the same email like so many people do. Don't be lazy, be smart. Have a good strategy and come up with, and a lot of times when we're following up with too many people, it's hard to do. So then you have to prioritize who you're following up with. You have to have stages in your pipeline to understand who's in what stage and take people from one stage to the other stage to the other stage. And sometimes they go back a stage. So how often do you follow up, and how do you follow up with people based on the stage that they're currently in? If you know that these people like to get interviewed for podcasts, then interview them for a podcast or offer them to get interviewed for a podcast. In this kind of sale, it's a B2B sale. And with a B2B sale, it's very difficult to make that sale with one conversation. You have to have many conversations. And so the key is to set up a series of conversations and never finish one conversation without setting up the next conversation.
Fair enough. Great tactics. And I think the point about testing with marketing is such an important one, because I often, everybody's searching for that magic answer. If I do these things, that'll grow my business. And it's so much about testing and testing. All right. I want to shift back a couple of questions to podcasting specifically. And I'll ask you this broad question from your perspective, having been on so many shows. What do you think makes for a good interview?
From the host or from the guest?
Let's look at it from both sides. So when you end an interview and you feel like, oh, that was good, what is it about that host experience, questions, whatever combination thereof, that you felt it ended up being a good conversation?
I think that when you guys have rapport and you're jiving and you know the target audience you're speaking to, and you're having a really good connected conversation to that target audience, or about that target audience, or with that target audience, that becomes very, very powerful, because it's not just you and the person having a good jiving conversation, it's having a good jiving conversation as it relates to your target market. So if your target market's entrepreneurs and you're talking about things that entrepreneurs care about, and you're jiving and it's interesting and it's fun, then it's exciting. If things get boring and petered out and there's no rapport, and one person's obviously checking their emails and the other person's off on the deep end and they're just literally asking questions and not even acknowledging what the person said, those get boring really quickly, especially those podcasts where the person just interviews 100 people and asks them all the same questions. Yeah, the key is to have an interesting conversation and keep people's attention by changing your tonality, by having fun, by making a joke, by being sarcastic, by doing something a little ridiculous once in a while, by mixing it up. So if you do those things, it gets exciting. The key is to be engaging and entertaining at the same time while educating the people. So it depends on what your objective is. It depends on the culture of the podcast. Podcasts have culture. They have culture, and the culture of your podcast is determined by what your objective is. What would you like to achieve? And so every podcast is another miracle. It's another conversation. It's an opportunity to create a masterpiece. And art is relative. Beauty is relative. So it depends on the person. And as long as you and your host or you and your guest are having a good time, I think that's all that really matters.
Mm-hmm. Right, because that communicates. So for me, the way that I think I facilitate that is by making sure that I'm well prepared. What are your thoughts now, switching it when you are a host? How much do you prepare and research for an interview?
It depends on the person that I'm interviewing and depends on the purpose of what I'm doing. For me, it's more about, like, for example, CEO Mojo, I was interviewing people that I knew well. So I didn't have to interview much. Like, I knew them for years.
Right.
If you're interviewing complete and total strangers, I would read their LinkedIn history. I would find some interesting things to mention about them. You don't have to spend hours and hours on research. You can do a Google search, look at a couple of things, read their LinkedIn, read their LinkedIn updates, read their LinkedIn profile, look at their website, read their about us. You can do all that within 5 minutes and you'll get a clear picture. If you really want to go deep, Google them and then listen to some interviews. People do interviews and they often say the same thing over and over and over. So if you listen to somebody's interview like Gary Vaynerchuk or Tony Robbins, you listen to 1, 2, or 3, you basically listen to all of them.
Right.
I've heard Tony Robbins at UPW multiple times, and every time I heard him say the same things. And I read what he said in his book that he created 40 years ago. He created a book 40 years ago in the 80s. He created a book called Awaken the Power Within. And that was one of the few books he created. And he just repeats the same thing he said in the book over and over. A guy, Jack Daly, I know. He's a inspirational speaker, sales coach for entrepreneurs in EO and YPO and Vistage, very popular in the CEO circles. He says the same thing, speech after speech. He does a 2-hour speech. He says the same thing, makes the same jokes. I heard him 3 times in a row within the same week, and I loved every second of it. It's a performance. It's like watching a Broadway show. We all listen to music, the same song over and over and over, and we still love it every single time, like the Dance Monkey song or the Macarena or whatever it is, whatever song you listen to, or you watch the same movie over and over and over because you love the movie. And when you watch Game of Thrones for the 4th time, you're going to find new things in the 4th time that you didn't see in the 2nd time, 3rd time. Same thing with podcasts, same thing with learning. People retain very little information. People, you can listen to this podcast 3 times, and every single time you're going to get something new out of it. So same thing with books, same thing with everything. So it's okay for you not to do that much research, but do some basic research and have fun. And again, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. What you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to close a deal, you probably want to do more research. If you don't have questions prepared, usually it's harder. But for me, I'm such an experienced host that I can bring anybody on my podcast and just have a great time with them and just enjoy myself and ask them questions based on my audience and what they would be interested in hearing from the person. And I can keep somebody answering, because one of my core values is curiosity. So if I was interviewing you, I could probably keep interviewing you for several hours.
Sure.
It doesn't work so well when you're dating because it feels like interrogation.
Feels like interrogation, yeah.
Yeah, but it works really, really well on a podcast.
Is that a gift you always, I mean, obviously you expressed your fear of speaking, but that's different than, were you always the type of person that was curious about others and could have a conversation easily, or did you have to learn that?
So I was always the type of person that was curious about others, but I didn't have the courage to ask people questions and to interview people because I was afraid that I would look like an idiot or all the judgment or who am I to ask you questions. But I had curiosity. So I would always touch everything, and I would always reverse engineer Google, reverse engineer the web, reverse engineer. I like looking at the code of websites, seeing how things are made. I love turning things inside out. My mother always reminds me when she would rent a car in Florida and bring me for our business trip, that I would turn the whole car inside out, read the whole manual, touch every single button, reprogram the full radio. Like, I would mess with her cash register and make it print out all types of words and all types of things from a cash register that only had buttons. And I figured out how to use those buttons to program certain messages. So I just love exploring and all that. When it comes to relationships, I used to have a big fear of doing it in a relationship sense because I thought that people are private like me. I'm like a Scorpio. I'm very secretive. But people love it. People love the topic that every single person loves talking about more than anything in the whole wide world as Dale Carnegie says, and as you just said, is themselves. And so when you can ask people about them, they will feel so good because it's a form of therapy. Self-expression is needed. Expressing yourself and sharing your values and your thoughts and your knowledge and your information is something that people value, and they don't often get a chance. They don't get heard by their spouse. They don't get heard by their employees. They don't get heard by anybody. So you're listening to them and your listeners are listening to them. Hallelujah. You're just pumping it. You're pumping it.
I love that. No, that's so true. All right, 2 more questions and I'll turn it back to Ethan. As it relates to being a host, asking good questions, I think we have to become students of that. Is there a tip that comes to mind that has helped you improve how you ask effective questions?
Ask open-ended questions. So if I said, Henry, do you like tuna fish? You're like, yes, I love tuna fish. And the conversation's over. So, or I would follow up with that with, what do you love most about tuna fish? Like, how did you really get into tuna fish back in the day? And you're like, oh, let me tell you about my mother. My mother was a tuna fish aficionado. I don't even know how to say that word, but it's amazing.
It sounded like fish. That's how it worked.
Yeah, something aficionado. And she loved tuna fishing. We used to go on our boat and blah, blah, blah. And she doesn't stop. It turns into a whole thing. And you follow the rabbit hole. See where it goes. Follow the rabbit hole. When somebody takes a left turn, go with it. See where it goes and give people the opportunity to take a left turn and know when to interrupt them so that you can keep the podcast moving.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, because we do have to manage the flow of the show. So what do you do there? Are there any techniques that you can think of to get it back on track?
Whoa, what you just said was incredible. I want to point that down, but I want to get back to the question that I asked you earlier, because I want to keep this podcast on track, but I really want to talk about how your mother and how she got into it. But let's get back to that. And you could get back to it, or you can get back to it after on a future episode. And you bring them in by interrupting, by making noise. People are intuitive enough, especially good guests are intuitive enough, that the second you try to interrupt, or if you're shaking your head rapidly, or you're trying to talk, or you lift your finger, that they know to kind of give you a pause enough for you to interrupt.
Got it.
And so when you hear that pause coming in, you can say something. Now, often you could say, wow, that's incredible. Or thank you so much for sharing that. You know what that brings up for me? I'm actually allergic to tuna fish, or whatever it is that you want to say. And then you turn it into, you close the loop, and then you shift it where you want to go. The person who controls the conversation is not the person who's speaking. The person who controls the conversation is the person who's asking questions, because the questions that you ask is what's going to determine how the conversation will go. Now, a smart politician and a smart business person knows how to answer the question however they want. So if you could say, Joe, what do you do for a living? I'm going to say, you know what I love about palm trees? And I could do it, say whatever I want, because it doesn't matter what you ask. You're asking a question to get me talking. So if you listen to the beginning of this podcast and you listen to the question that Ethan asked me and the way that I answered it, I don't have to accurately answer his question because he's doing a conversation starter. He's not on a fact-finding mission.
Right.
So that's a very big insight for people that are both guests and hosts. Don't get hung up on how people answer questions. Don't get stuck on that, unless, of course, you're on a fact-finding mission, then you can take them back and ask the question in a different way. But if you're not, and you're just having a conversation and you're trying to add value to an audience, try to pull the nuggets out. Try to give a recap. I always take notes when I'm interviewing somebody, and if they say something interesting, I'll jot it down. And I will come back to that later, or I will mention it again, and I will give a recap of what they said and what I got out of it, and I'll try to get a little more out of it.
Brilliant stuff. All right, one last question. I know this is a loaded question, since one of the things we wanted to converse about was your expertise with LinkedIn. As a podcaster, maybe I'll ask it this way. What do you think, and I'm a good example of it, that most of us as podcasters are missing out in using LinkedIn to promote our show? What do you think is the biggest gap there?
The biggest gap is telling people about your show on LinkedIn. So writing about the people that were on the show, featuring them, mentioning them. So for example, after every single show, I would write a summary of what we spoke about, because remember, I took notes, I have bullet points, and then I would tell people, leave a comment and let me know if you want us to send you the episode when it drops.
Okay.
And so you're doing pre-promotional work, you're doing post-promotional work. Most people don't prepare assets for their guests and send the assets to their guests, like 20-second snippets of them talking that they can share, or you sharing those snippets and having them like and comment on those snippets. Also, you're not messaging people and letting them know you have a podcast. Most people are just not doing that. You're not asking people if you can email them a sample episode for them to listen to, an episode that's relevant to them. There's a lot of powerful ways to leverage LinkedIn to gain an audience, but the key is to do the 3 most important things you need to do on LinkedIn each day if you want to be successful. And this is something we teach inside our LinkedIn course and coaching program. We have a really great course and coaching program. So if you go to learnbusinessnetworking.com, you could learn how to use LinkedIn inside our course and coaching program. And what we teach people is the 3 most important things to get out of LinkedIn is number 1, exposure, number 2, credibility, and number 3, meetings or conversations. So exposure you get from posting on LinkedIn. And there are 6 different ways to post, and we teach you how to post to get the maximum exposure from the algorithm. Number 2, credibility. You get credibility from engaging on LinkedIn, but intentionally engaging in the right way. So understanding the difference between mentioning, endorsing, recommending, liking, commenting, sharing, and how the algorithm sees the different ones and the benefits of each one. And then the third thing you want to do is learning how to have conversations in the DM that lead to meetings or that lead to podcast followers. And then getting your followers to share information about your podcast and incentivize them to do it. So there are many different ways to get your podcast out there, to build your email list, to grow your fan base, to build up your Instagram from LinkedIn. There's a lot of really great things you can do on LinkedIn, but having the right marketing strategy will save you a decade.
Great stuff. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to Ethan, but where can we go online to learn more about that and everything else you have to offer?
Well, the first stop is go to joelinkedin.com. That's my LinkedIn profile. I bought a domain name that forwards directly to LinkedIn because my last name is a little difficult to remember. So it's joelinkedin.com, J-O-E LinkedIn.com, and read my About section. My About section is a section under my photo and my headline that has all different types of calls to action, including webinars, including how to sign up to my email list, including how to set up a call with me, including how to access my courses and my agency, and all that information's on there. I've written several books. If you just search Joe Apfelbaum books on Google, you're going to see a list of all the different books that I've written. The beauty is that Amazon, for SEO purposes, has the books come up as Google products. So whenever you search your own name with the word books after it, if your books are on Amazon, it'll come up really nicely over there. So there's powerful ways to get in touch with people. But for me, the most powerful way is inviting people to find me on LinkedIn by going to joelinkedin.com.
Thank you, Joe. Ethan, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, that's great. And that's great how you've made, LinkedIn kind of your homepage in a way. And there's sort of all sorts of ways to approach it. And I think that's pretty cool that you've leveraged it to that degree. I want to, in the last, maybe we've got about 7 or 8 minutes left, which I think is sufficient time to kind of dive into like a hypothetical to kind of talk about what we might do. So I have a like a hypothetical loosely based on a real situation. Okay. And we'll see. I want to know from you, like, if I came to you as a potential client, right? And let's say not for your courses, but actually for your services. So that means I've got to have a business that's got, 5 million in revenue at least, right? Annual revenue. So let's say I have a healthcare company that serves a certain type of market, let's say elderly folks. And let's say I want to start a podcast. I don't have one yet, but I want to start it. And what I'm going to do is on that podcast, I'm going to interview the sort of partners that I tend to work with, the ones that recommend my healthcare service to, patients and elders and things like that need home care. In this case, I want to start talking with you not only about that podcast, but just kind of about my general marketing strategy. And I'm really engaged. I think I might hire you. What kind of stuff are you going to talk to me about? And what do you foresee? You know, I know you don't have the even more specifics, but what do you foresee us getting into, and how you and your agency could specifically help us?
Well, the first thing we would do is we would create a strategy for you, a marketing strategy. Most people do not have any marketing strategies. So we would learn about your business, your goals, your target market, your messaging. We do a SWOT analysis, your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. We'd figure out your competitive advantage, like everything about your business, and write it all down. Once we have those findings, we would learn about your target market. We would learn everything about the listeners. We would learn everything about what they want to know, what their pains are, what their gains are, what are their goals, what are their fears, what are their dreams, what do they consider value, like really getting down and hashing out your messaging. And from that, we're going to be able to get topics, like podcast topics. We're going to create for you a dozen podcast topics for your first 12 episodes. And from that, you're going to figure out who the perfect guest is, or the perfect guests that you can interview around those topics, and come up with 3 to 5 sample questions for those guests. And of course, give them some promotion because their target audience is your target audience. And then also be able to come up with some type of handout or a one sheet or information that will allow them to market the podcast when it goes live to their particular audience. And ultimately, what's going to happen is I'm going to have 12 different episodes with 12 different experts that have 12 marketing channels themselves. And that's going to get me their clients to all come and subscribe to my podcast. I would also find other people that are related to that industry that already have podcasts, and I would try to become a guest on those podcasts and get the hosts of those podcasts to become a guest on my podcast as well, to be able to mesh with their audience and be able to grab, because podcast people usually go from one podcast to another podcast. There are some people that listen to podcasts. That's what it is. I would also come up with a plan to repurpose the content for all the different social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, wherever the people are. And I wouldn't necessarily just be targeting the elderly audience. I would also be targeting their children, which often make decisions about which home care to choose and so on. So I'll be very smart about how I'm doing it. But the first step is creating a strategy. The second step is creating assets. And the third step is disseminating those assets to the world to do it in a smart way. So that in a nutshell is what I would do. And if you want to learn more about this in depth, I wrote an entire book about this process called High Energy Marketing.
I have got it
All
in my
right.
Amazon cart. I had not read that,
Pull
Joe,
it
but
up.
I'm
Let's
going to
start
read that
reading
next.
it word for word.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good stuff.
Get the digital version. um, uh, so I appreciate that. And just to get a little bit more specific on how you can support businesses, with the agency side of things. Um, when folks are engaging with Ajax Union, are you kind of full service? We've got a team that's going to help create these assets and distribute them and clip them up and, take your ad budget and implement it on these various channels. Or are you more of a strategic partner and, folks have to have their in-house, marketing team that sort of actually implements what you're going to advise upon?
Depending on their budget, different people, different companies have different budgets and the resources that they already have internally. So if you have a healthy budget and you can afford to have us do everything for you, A to Z, we can do everything, lock, stock, and barrel. We can do the strategy, the assets, the execution, the technology, everything, from the art to the writing to the voiceovers to the intro, outro, video, like whatever you need, we get it done. We have some in-house, but we outsource most of the stuff. Most of the talent that we have, we outsource, especially the execution talent. And if you have resources already, let's say you have a podcast guy or a gal, or you have internal resources like a marketing director, a graphic designer, a writer, a developer, you have resources already, you can leverage us for strategy and we can inform what you guys need to do internally, which will support your team and make sure that you're doing it correctly.
Great. So you actually have the capacity to do both, whatever the client happens to need in those
Yeah,
cases.
our tagline is we keep your bottom line top of mind. And your bottom line is like considering not just your profit, but your goal. Like what do you want to achieve and what are the resources that you have in total? And that's how we support you.
Beautiful. I love that model, and that's definitely got to be something that appeals to folks, right? It's hard when you're an entrepreneur to feel like anybody's on your side.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right.
Realize that everything that happens in your favor. Everything that happens in your favor. All the events that happen are really neutral, and we get to choose if we're going to be leveraging the events that happen. So, final words are remember, you are amazing, and you get to choose if you're attracting abundance or scarcity based on how your mindset is. And if you have the right strategy, it'll help save a lot of time.
Perfect. Thank you, Joe. We're
Thank you,
leaving
Joe.
on a motivated note. Thank you so
Woo-hoo.
much. We'll be in touch, and I really appreciate your time and hope to be in touch again soon. And man, enjoy that beach. I hope you get to go for a nice swim out there. I'm jealous.
I'm going. I'm excited. I'm pumped. Thank you so much. We'll talk
Thanks,
again
Joe.
soon.
All right.